Hello, and welcome to James and the Frames. I'm your host, James, and here I talk about some of the greatest frames ever filmed while discussing film related topics with you guys. This is our 16th episode. I'm super excited to talk about a film that really left me speechless. Oldboy, the classic film from 2003, co-written and directed by Park Chan-wook, or Wook, however you pronunciate it. The synopsis is as follows. A man, held captive for no apparent reason for years, is given a cell phone, money, and expensive clothes and released. Unless he finds out the identity of his captor, an even worse fate awaits him. Now, as I said in my intro, this film is unique. It left me speechless. This film will stick with me for a very long time, and I'm so glad I finally got around to watching it. This is a harrowing thriller that had me thoroughly engaged. It's not your typical thriller. This one is definitely an outstanding example of exceptional filmmaking. The performances are great, as expected. The direction is amazing. The whole tone of the film is just brilliantly executed. This is one of the most intense films I've seen in a while. It's very, very intense. It is a revenge movie, but it's probably one of my favorite revenge movies now. I have to give it a second watch to catch all the things I missed on the first viewing, but my goodness. This is a one-of-a-kind revenge film that explores so many different themes that relate to this type of subgenre for films. It knocked the breath out of me, and I was mesmerized from the very first scene. I'm going to try and keep this mostly spoiler-free, but just in case, there are spoiler timestamps in the description so you guys can jump past them and listen to me talk about the film spoiler free. I will give a tiny warning before jumping into spoilers, of course, but to talk about the rest of this film is shot beautifully. There are intricate camera shots, there's excellent long takes, and immaculate framing. Immaculate. The shots in this film are so beautiful and smart and well framed. So well framed. There is a fight sequence in this film that takes place in a hallway, and it's pretty iconic, so I don't think I'd be spoiling the film if I'm mentioning it, because it's a fight scene that takes place in a hallway that is also done in just one long shot, and I think it's probably the most memorable scene from this film. If you were to ask someone what their favorite scene from Oldboy was, they'd probably say the hallway fight scene. Now, I'm explaining it without giving it too much context because it is that iconic and that memorable. I'm sure if you search Oldboy in Google search, one of the first images that pop up will probably be from that hallway fight sequence, and it probably appears in the trailer too. But that's probably the most memorable scene because it's the pinnacle of brilliant fight choreography and a carefully planned long shot. There's no strange jump cuts, there's no weird shaky cam. It's just so gritty and realistic and shot so well, as is the rest of this film. The editing, I also noticed, is very, very good. Some sequences flow together just very, very well. The score for this film is very powerful and vigorous. It has some of the best uses of classical music I've seen in a while, specifically for some intense scenes where that classical music contrasts with what's happening on screen, which I always love to see. The third act for this film had me white-knuckled and had my mouth wide open. I'm going to talk about it in a second, but it is a very intense third act. And this film is not for the faint of heart. There are some very harsh and intense scenes, but it is very rewarding to watch. It is a true classic, in my opinion. After seeing this film, I kind of just sat and stared at the screen while the credits rolled by. and I don't do that much. This just makes me love Korean filmmaking even more, and I'm going to go even deeper into different directors and genres because, damn, do they know how to make good films. There is brilliant direction and screenplay by Park Chan-wook, or Wook. Apparently, this film is part of a trilogy called the Vengeance Trilogy. The films aren't connected story-wise in any way, but I'm definitely going to check out Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance and Lady Vengeance because this director knows his stuff. The direction is brilliant, and I do have to talk about the actors a little more. I cannot pronounce for the life of me any of the lead actors, but the lead actor who plays the main character is brilliant in the film. The actor who plays the villain is also brilliant. He delivers a monologue near the end of the film that is just so captivating, and you had to listen to his every word, and his line delivery is impeccable. And while the character transition that the main character goes through, it's also very interesting to watch, being that this man, having been locked in a apartment building, or a motel room, sorry, for a very long time, you see the emotional distress and what this character goes through. That makes him who he is for the rest of the film. And basically, the rest of the cast just does great. There's not really a flat performance at all. This film can get very charismatic, and it has great action scenes. I gotta tell you, the action in this movie, you can't take your eyes off it. It's so realistic, and I'll say it again, it's very, very well choreographed. If you're looking for good fight scenes, or if you're watching some compilation of fight scenes from popular movies on YouTube, I'm sure some of the fight scenes from this film will definitely come on. Now, I am going to talk about spoilers for a little bit. The timestamp for when I stop talking about spoilers will be in the description, so if you have not seen the film, do not advance after this point because there are some very, very heavy spoilers, and I do not want to ruin the movie for you. Please go experience it and then come back. All right, final warning in 3, 2, 1, spoiler talk. All right. Now, that plot twist was very well done. The build-up to it all, it reminded me a lot of the final episode of Cowboy Bebop, where Spike Spiegel goes to confront Vicious, and goes and confronts him on the top floor of a building. But this third act was so intense from when Oldboy, I'm just going to call him Oldboy because he's the main character, from when Oldboy goes into the elevator and tries all the different combinations, also including the combination he saw when he followed the delivery guy earlier in the movie for the very famous hallway sequence. In that whole sequence, he pushes the 2 and the 6 at the same time to try and get the floor number right. That was a very interesting detail. The build up to this confrontation, to this evil guy who said that, well, haha, you can't kill me because I have a trigger that will basically deactivate my heart and kill me, so you can't torture me and get your vengeance because I can just kill myself painlessly. So right when Oldboy is about to come out of the elevator, I completely forgot this, and now I noticed it. He's actually doing some sort of heart surgery a little bit before, I believe. So I think he fixes his heart in a way or does something, because obviously the remote to his heart, his kill switch, does not work, and, well, we find out why in a second. But that's a detail I didn't notice. But the build up to this, he comes in, he goes up against his henchman, he's basically ready to show down. He's telling this guy, hey, I know it was you, I saw you with your sister, I know what you did. And it's a very powerful monologue from Oldboy himself. But then he gets countered with an even more powerful monologue and a really haunting and disturbing and just an emotionally wrenching plot twist when our main villain explains that, in fact, Oldboy's lover, the woman he's been attached to for the majority of this film, is actually his daughter. Now, at first, I caught it. I caught it before Oldboy starts going through the photo album and sees that it's his daughter. I thought for a second, wait, no, that can't possibly happen. You cannot go that far. That would just break me and Oldboy, of course, but that would just blow my mind. And he did go that far. He went that far as to leave us with a bittersweet ending. The quote, "Even though I'm worse than a beast, don't I deserve to live?" will stick with me for a very, very long time. The whole sequence that follows after Oldboy finds out that his lover, that he made passionate love to earlier in the film, and that's someone he loves, is his daughter, is one of the most intense 15 to 20 minutes I've ever seen in a film. The absolute desperation and anger that pours out of this character and this actor who acts it so well. The frantic pleading with his daughter over the phone while his daughter sits in front of a box that contains probably the pictures of him and her. It's just so intense. And I just remember now, I caught the twist because the girl took the angel wings that he was going to give her for her birthday way back when, before he got taken by that corporation. I noticed, oh, those are the same angel wings from the beginning of the film. Could it be his daughter? No, it's not his daughter. It is his daughter. And he's desperately trying to keep that secret from her. And he'll do anything. And he does everything. He goes absolutely berserk. He goes insane. And he ends up pleading and pleading so much for this man's apology, for him to forgive what he's done, so he can't do the same, basically, to his own daughter. It's just heart-wrenching. And to see our main character in that place with that vulnerability, it's really well executed, and it makes you care for the character even more to see him in this position. And finally, he cuts off his tongue, which was a very excruciatingly hard scene to watch. But he does. And what's very sadistic and creepy and just all outright disturbing, the most disturbing thing of this sequence is that the main villain is actually holding a rag to his mouth, laughing into the rag. He's just enjoying this moment so much. He's just he can barely talk. He's laughing into this cloth, and he's trying to look serious because, well, who wouldn't pity this guy? Not our main villain, that's for sure. And, well, the main villain, after forgiving Oldboy, he gives Oldboy the supposed kill switch to his heart. And he starts walking away, and you get this very, very intense sequence of Oldboy wanting to press that switch. But he knows that this man has given him another chance, or at least his daughter another chance. But he still presses it. And by revealing that side of his true nature, the desire for vengeance, to ultimately get vengeance, because that's what the revenge plot is about, right? He so desperately wants to get vengeance and kill this guy for locking him away and ruining his life. But by pressing the button, it's revealed that it's in fact not a kill switch, but a remote control that then plays the audio from the sex scene between him and his daughter. Which just, it's defined that sequence for me as just, it's breathtaking. It's breathtaking. The brutality and unforgiving nature of that scene will stick with me for a very long time. As the villain basically remarks, will you be able to live with what you know before going down and leaving Oldboy to listen to him having intercourse with his offspring? It's just, it's disgusting and disturbing and heart-wrenching and so many different emotions I could not process while watching this sequence. And to top it all off, we get a bittersweet conclusion to our villain story. he has a reminiscent moment with his sister before shooting himself in the head. And his life ends, and it's kind of a bittersweet ending. I mean, now Oldboy is still alive with everything he knows, and the villain killed himself. Oldboy didn't get his vengeance, and he's basically screwed. He has nothing left until we get the final scene where Oldboy goes back to the lady who gave him the hypnosis in the first place, and she basically splits him into two persons. One person who is the monster who keeps the secret of his daughter being his lover with himself. And a very beautiful sequence where the monster walks away from our main character, the other person, aging 1 year per step. It's very, very well executed. And of course, the other person has apparently his memory erased of everything he knows. And, well, we are left with an open ending. Now, why do I say an open ending? First of all, we don't know that Oldboy still knows that his lover is his daughter, or we don't know that he has actually not been hypnotized at all and still remembers everything. Because there's such a subtle moment between these two characters that you see the expression on his face, and it goes through a different variety of emotions. It starts out pretty serious, but then it goes, I believe, into a smile or a bit of a half smile. And the film ends with those two looking across the New Zealand landscape. And it's a great way to end the film, in my opinion, because, well, I'm a huge fan of open endings. I am grateful that the filmmaker would share such an ending with the audience. I always thought about open endings as the storyteller passing the torch down to the viewer to let their imagination and creativity fill in the blanks. Endings to movies like Inception or Black Swan are so great because they leave it up for interpretation, and I really enjoy that. So hats off to director Park Chan-wook. He did a brilliant job. And to sum it all up, Oldboy is a film that, I'll say it again, will stick with me for a very long time. It is a harrowing thriller that is not for the faint of heart, but it had me thoroughly engaged. It's not your typical thriller, and it's an outstanding example of exceptional filmmaking in its own right. There's great performances, brilliant direction, brilliant cinematography, and its overall story is one of the best revenge stories to exist. Period. And Oldboy absolutely gets a 5 out of 5. I will rewatch it, but I highly doubt that my score will go down. So yeah, that's Oldboy, and I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it. It's very good. Now, we do have some Q&As, but before I jump into Q&As, I'd like to let you guys know that my YouTube channel is up. It's called James and the Frames. You can search it up, and it'll appear with the channel icon. I thank you all for the support on my short film customer service. I thank everyone who's involved. You all did a great job, and I'm super proud. So if you guys haven't seen customer service yet, please go check it out. It's definitely not a masterpiece, but it's not terrible either. I don't know if that's a good explanation, but please do give it a watch if you haven't seen it. I'd really appreciate it. And for those of you who are Star Wars fans, I have done 3 videos related to Star Wars for the month of May, which is basically the month of Star Wars. But tomorrow I'm going to upload something a little different, and I'm super excited to share it with you guys. Now, without further ado, let's get into some of these questions that you guys have left. You guys left a couple really good questions. So, first one being, what is your favorite film from 2014? Wow, that is a, well, I'm going to have to, one that has always stuck with me that will forever be the most rewatchable, or one of the most rewatchable films I've ever seen is Whiplash. I've seen that film so many times. It's practically insane, and it's just so brilliant. I love it. It's a classic. It's a classic, and I would want to talk about it someday on this podcast, but maybe with a guest, because there's a lot to be said about Whiplash. But Whiplash definitely my favorite of 2014. There's a lot of other great films in 2014 too. Nightcrawler, Boyhood, Birdman, The Grand Budapest Hotel. All great films. I'm trying to think of any more. Yeah, I always get a lot of 2013 and 2014 films mixed up. Under the Skin I believe, was released in 2014 too, so that's great. Gone Girl was also released in 2014. It's a great film. I'm sure there's some great films from 2014. I'm sure you guys can tell me which ones they are. But I'm definitely aiming to talk about one of those films from that year, because that year was tremendous. I mean, when I was younger, it completely went over my head until a couple of years later that I missed experiencing some of the greatest films of the past decade in theaters, but, well, woe is me. That's my favorite film of 2014, which is Whiplash. All right, next question. Well, it's not really a question. I mean, it's more of a comment. Loved customer service. Great job. Oh, thank you very much. Well, I did want to say something about customer service, and I'm going to put a poll on my Instagram later if you guys want. I was thinking about doing a director's commentary over the film, like a little behind-the-scenes extra content. I mean, it's something I've always wanted to do, talk about behind the scenes of filming something, because I've learned a lot from behind-the-scenes documentaries. Of course, specifically the Star Wars behind-the-scenes documentaries, because they basically show you how a film is made, and it's great. And by watching a lot of B-roll, there are some very good videos on YouTube that show B-roll. B-roll, for those of you who don't know, is basically footage that isn't used, but can be used later, if I'm explaining that right. And, well, this particular B-roll is, of course, from behind-the-scenes footage by someone just filming the set with a camera. Instead of the cameras that are filming the movie having B-roll, it's basically B-roll in a documentary style. It's great. But getting back on track, I would love to do a director's commentary of customer service, because there's some interesting stories behind the scenes that I'd like to share with you guys. So I'm going to put a poll on Instagram, and it'll be a yes or no poll. And I'll upload a customer service commentary if you guys like. I'll even do it in Espanol también, if you guys want. Because I know there's some Spanish listeners out there that would love to hear me speak Spanish. And yes, I'll get to it. So, all right, let's see. All right, we've got one more. And this one I haven't answered in a while, but I've kept it because I've been thinking about it a lot. And it's, what is your favorite A24 film? And which one do you think is kind of underrated? Well, to answer the first part of your question, my favorite A24 film has to be, it's a three-way competition. It's between The Lighthouse, Hereditary, and Under the Skin, because, well, they're all psychological horror films. A24, I think, has a lot of horror films under its belt, but if I had to pick one, I'd have to go with Hereditary, because it's one of the first A24 films I saw. Well, A24 produced films that I saw. Hereditary probably is my favorite A24 film, but it's subject to change, as most of my favorite films are. A couple that I think are kind of underrated that not a lot of people talk about. One is The Spectacular Now, which is a great teenage coming-of-age movie. It has Miles Teller. I forgot that one actress. I think it's Shailene Woodley. I think that's her name. They both bring out great performances, and it's basically a teen dramedy, but it's very well written. It's very, very well written. It has one of the best screenplays for a teen dramedy of that type that I've ever seen. And Miles Teller, of course, the same guy who acted in Whiplash, he gives such a John Cusack 80s vibe in that movie that I love a lot. So The Spectacular Now is pretty underrated. I don't think a lot of people have seen it. Another A24 film that's underrated. It's hard to say underrated because I don't know if some of you guys have an actual fan base for these types of films. I would have to say Eighth Grade is another great coming of age movie. That's just it's amazing. And First Reformed, which I believe is also produced by A24. Gosh, those are great, and not a lot of people give them credits. And The Witch. The Witch is it's Robert Eggers' first feature film, and it was a brilliant debut. So in terms of A24 films, those are my favorite ones, and those are some underrated ones that I think should get a little bit more recognition. So, alright, well, guys, this concludes the 16th episode of James and the Frames. Thank you all so much for listening. Your support has been absolutely amazing throughout these past 2 weeks. Ever since my transition to YouTube, I've gotten a lot of great feedback on that one video I did about the Star Wars prequels. It has over 400 views. I'm actually super surprised that it's doing that well. And of course, customer service, just overwhelming support, and I thank you all so much for listening and watching. More content to come very soon, and, well, I'll see you guys after the credits.